welcome everyone to this is probably like the first real episode. Last episode that you may have heard was just doing a little bit of intro.
Just a little intro, get to know us a little bit,
Just come and stay,
Come and stay a
Take
while.
your jacket off, take the shoes off, man.
Grab an ice
Wait,
cold.
how that song goes like, why don't you put that fucking phone down? You know what I'm talking about?
No, what is that?
No, you don't know that one? No, it was like,
Why don't you put your fucking phone down?
It was like a meme or something to like the audio on like, I don't know.
Suckers.
It was a long ass time ago. You don't remember that?
No.
That doesn't ring any bells at all?
Now, friends, these books are free.
Suckers.
Paid for by real Americans who want others to know the truth.
Suckers.
But I'm an American. Some of the things I see in this country of ours make my blood boil.
Suckers.
What's going to become of us real Americans?
Suckers.
Real Americans.
Suckers.
Real Americans.
Suckers.
Real Americans.
Suckers.
Remember that when you hear this kind of talk, somebody is going to get something out of it, and it isn't going to be you. So let's not be
Suckers.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started here with actual content. Today, we would like to really try and define fascism to the best of our abilities. And it's been tried by quite a few people throughout history.
Quite a few.
We'll
talk
and I
about
would
some
say
of
it's
those.
been tried by even the fascists themselves in the initial stages.
What did it take Mussolini, like 23 years to create a doctrine or something?
I think it was like 15 or something like that. It was like
1933 was the doctrine of fascism.
Oh, was it that late?
1915.
So I think that's
So
like
18 years.
18.
18
Pretty
years.
bad. That's pretty bad how we're getting a quicker handle on
They were
it.
scrambling to make they're like, we need something.
But-
we can't just do action anymore.
But we'll talk about all that and more throughout this episode. So with this discussion, let's break it down into this. Let me ask you, Tom.
Yes.
Why do you think this podcast, why do we need to define why does anyone need fascism defined? Isn't it something that we all kind of already have an idea or knowledge about, or is it perhaps something that we don't really know a whole lot? Why do you think the impetus is on us, would you say?
I've heard a lot of arguments comparing fascism and socialism.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that no one truly knows what either one is. So I think that's one reason why, but I think the other big reason why we need to define it, well, it is partially the same reason, is that no one knows how to spot fascism. And I think a big reason for that is that fascists have been able to kind of blend in a bit better. And they figured out how to not get spotted as easily as they used to. They kind of put away the swastikas and maybe took off the hoods and tried to covertly swim in the waters,
Right.
Mm-hmm. That's what I think. I think it's just been harder to spot, and people are losing. They have amnesia in a lot of ways of what these things like socialism and fascism really are. What do you think?
So I'm gonna say I fully agree with that analysis. I want the listener for a moment to do a little thought experiment. I want you to, or an experiment and a thought experiment. I want you to go to somebody that you know, or even think about yourself if you don't really know. Really just hunker and think, what is the difference? What is the tangible difference between an ideology like fascism versus communism? What are the key differences between the two? And of course, we'll talk about them in a little bit. But a lot of you, I have a feeling, unless you're already well versed in the subject, like if you're just coming at this like a layman, you're coming at this from like a American high school education, for example. You may kind of think, oh, I don't know. I mean, I know they're both like authoritarian. Let's see, communists like red. I think the fascists, they like the swastika.
And
then
also red.
And the red and the brown, and they also like the leather every once in a while. I know World War II. Like, if you really talk about this with folks that who, again, are coming at this from the perspective of a layman, they only have an American public education system backing them, you'll find that they're incredibly ill-equipped to recognize what fascism is. They'll conflate the two. They'll have vague ideas of what makes them similar, very vague ideas of what makes them different. Usually, people will find that fascists are a little bit more focused on race, whereas communists, I mean, depending on who you ask, they could think anyone from a liberal to a Nazi is a communist, just off of the American education system. There's very little focus in trying to properly distinguish between the two. And despite that, the United States, our government, Tom and I's government, has had a huge hand in shielding fascists and propping up fascists. I have a very brief list of a few of the fascist movements and operations and whatnot that we have, that the United States has ordained. We, of course, had Operation Paperclip, bringing in Nazi scientists post-World War II. Us backing Pinochet in Chile, often been described as a fascist. Armas in Guatemala, the Somozas in Nicaragua, various leaders in El Salvador to prop up the Banana Republic that has been in place since the 50s, Perón in Argentina, Banzer in Bolivia, Stroessner in Paraguay, just to name a few examples. And you could definitely take that and spin it with a lot more examples of people that the United States State Department has backed militarily and politically.
And anyone at home who wants to look a little more into it, look into the School of Americas, of the Americas. Yes. Not School of Americas, of the Americas.
Yes.
Very different.
And just really the whole, Monroe Doctrine being used into the 21st century. So often you'll find communists and fascists are at odds with each other. World War II being an example. And then
the Soviet Union having liberated Auschwitz,
Berlin. Did they get Buchenwald, or was that the U.S.?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I'm not exact. I don't think it was. I think that was the U.S. They have that under their belt. But regardless, they often are at odds with each other, and all of the movements that that I had just previously listed that the U.S. has been in explicit support of, generally those are juxtaposed against an adversary communist organization or socialist organization that seeks to destroy whatever the United States props up as "quote unquote" freedom fighters, and form their own form of government. Now, the United States often supports these fascists because of how fervently anti-communist and anti-socialist they are. And I personally don't think it's any coincidence that the two are seemingly indistinguishable for most of the American population, because it would have you think, well, why are we supporting these people over there? And often,
like Bin Laden and Saddam Hussein, whether you think they're fascists or not, or whatever you think about that whole situation, originally those were our friends. Mm-hmm. Those were people who were fervent anti-communist fighters who eventually went on to wanting to nationalize their oil and became enemies. But that, yeah.
So Saddam Hussein is a bit of a unique example, considering he was a Iraqi Ba'athist, I think, the Ba'ath Party.
Yeah.
Which has its own socialist little roots in a way. It's unique, but that's neither here nor there. But regardless, I don't think it's any coincidence that the two are often conflated, because that allows the State Department to do whatever it wants. It support whoever it wants and enrich whoever it wants. While we, I mean, Jesus, have you seen some of those like man on the street interviews where they get somebody to like point at a country on a map? Like, it's dire in the U.S.
Yeah,
most
it's
of us
bad.
like most of us couldn't point to where like Iran was on a map in the United States, but we're expected to fully support our attempts to destroy Iran and you know, the Iranian government and whatnot, and we don't really even know like where they are,
let alone like their intricate social
Right.
and economic systems, and just
It's very, very deliberate. It's so that we kind of forget who the enemy is. We kind of just don't really pay attention, and so we allow the people above us to kind of just do whatever.
And I think a big reason why people don't really understand fascism, and I'm going to pull up this Michael Parenti quote from his book Black Shirts and Reds.
Would you perhaps, be able to explain very briefly who Michael Parenti is? And
Michael Parenti
Yeah.
is a Marxist writer. He has books about, he's got Black Shirts and Reds, which is just kind of comparing and contrasting communist and fascist governments, how they operate. And the main thing that, the thing he's most famous from that specific book is his idea of rational fascism, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. But he also has a book called Inventing Reality, which talks about media and how it's very similar to that book by
Noam Chomsky.
Noam Chomsky. But what one's that?
Manufacturing Consent.
Yes. It from what I've heard from people, it's kind of just a better version. But
I would agree.
yeah, so I think this quote I'm going to say, I think wraps it up pretty nicely why people don't understand it. So he says, some writers stress the irrational features of fascism. By doing so, they overlook the rational political economic functions that fascism performed. Much of politics is the rational manipulation of irrational symbols. Certainly, this is true of fascist ideology, whose emotive appeals have served a class control function. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that probably next episode. But I think it is an important point that fascism does have a certain economic goal and serves certain economic interests. And oftentimes when people think of fascism, they just go, well, it's, just anti-Semitism, racism. And while it is those things, I think that's almost somewhat of a veil in a weird way, like not that it's unimportant,
Baked into it.
but it's baked into it. Yeah, exactly.
And for the listeners, if you'd like to find where that quote is, that is from Michael Parenti's book, Black Shirts and Reds, Rational Fascism and the Overthrow of Communism, Chapter 1, page 11. Just in case you wanted to read that in your own time. He's also a very wonderful professor and orator. He's got many very, very interesting lectures that you can find throughout YouTube and other.
Just look up the
video.
Yellow Parenti video.
Yeah, Yellow Parenti. That's
Classic.
That's the classic. So for this first section, in the discussion of fascism and how it developed in Italy, in Germany, in Europe more broadly, I think we would be of course we would have to talk about nationalism and the development of nationalism as an ideology, because as it will be revealed, fascism is kind of the crystallization of nationalism. It's a hyper nationalism in a sense. And
It's almost a caricature of nationalism.
yes,
I think fascism in a lot of ways is a caricature of capitalism and nationalism at large, but we'll get into that.
right. So I first wanted to start this discussion by talking about where nationalism in Europe began, because it wasn't always there. A lot of people, I feel like, especially fascists, feel like there was always this innate like sense of community amongst white Europeans, and that is not true.
Not true at all.
That could not be further from the truth. So this is really a lot of this development in nationalism happens after the French Revolution. So prior to the French Revolution, you had a European society that was feudal. There were three estates. You had the first estate with the lords, the nobles, the aristocrats. You had the second estate, which was, usually the bishops, the archbishops, the church. And then you have the third estate, which is the peasantry. But increasingly, in the 18th century, that third estate is being made up of the bourgeoisie. These, people that wield a lot of capital. They own industry. They have factories, either in England or in northeastern United States, and increasingly in France, particularly, these people are swelling in the third estate, and also, of course, the development of people kind of in between what would be seen as like the peasantry and the bourgeoisie, what capitalists and liberals often refer to as the middle class, or as Marxist, petit bourgeoisie would not really count within the middle class. I guess that'd be a separate category.
Yeah.
Well, either way.
Yeah.
Either way. You had in the French Revolution, this first estate, these aristocrats kind of brushing up against this third estate in a lot of conflict and a lot of anger. The third estate feels like it's being forgotten about. Times are very hard in, the late 18th century France, helping the United States in its American War of Independence, which is not really a revolution. I've heard arguments for that, which I would personally agree with. The idea that nothing really changed societally within the United States. People who were in power before the revolution remained in power after the revolution. It was kind of more like they were just throwing the yoke of ownership off. But that's not what happened in France. In France, you had a complete and total uprooting of the society in favor of that third estate, of the peasantry.
And that would be kind of in Marxism, a resolution of a dialectic.
Yes.
Or a contradiction between the bourgeoisie and the aristocracy.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. And increasingly, of course, the contradictions, they come to a head and they have to be dealt with in some way, and that is in the form of a very bloody revolution. Now, outside of France, you have a lot of worry, because within France, increasingly amongst the third estate, you have these people who no longer care about the king. They no longer care about the queen. They don't care about the aristocracy or the feudalism or any of that. Because prior to that, the king's right to rule was a divine right to rule by God. It was ordained by God, and increasingly with ideas of the Enlightenment, this idea that every man is equal. Of course, depends on what kind of man you're talking about in this time.
Yeah, coming out of France, that
Yes.
shouldn't mean a whole lot
Yes.
with their occupation of places like Haiti.
Yes. And then
Senegal
Napoleon immediately making slavery legal again within Haiti once he's in power. But these ideas that the Americans kind of were touting in front of the French when they were helping the U.S. out, they brought those ideas home, And increasingly, the French people are realizing, like, wait a minute. Yeah, we don't have to take this. We're all French. We all have our own history, our own culture. And if we all throw our yoke behind Napoleon, we can make this thing actually happen. We can make this thing work. And it was scary for a lot of European society, particularly amongst the aristocracy within European society. Particularly, you had a lot of concerns amongst Austria, Prussia, and Great Britain, of course, now referred to as the United Kingdom. These three all work together to try and completely destroy the Napoleonic Empire. They succeed, and Napoleon, he is like cast to an island and then has this very brief thing where he's like, "I'm back. Y'all miss me? You guys want to go for another ride? Try it again?"
And which Napoleon is this?
This is Napoleon the First.
Okay.
Napoleon the Second doesn't really get any screen time at all. Napoleon the Third gets a little bit more screen time than Napoleon the Second.
Yeah, it's funny because you look up Napoleon and then it's like, I feel like a lot of people will look up Napoleon and go, "Oh wait, which one are we talking about?"
Right? No, yeah, Napoleon Bonaparte, of course. But in the destruction of Napoleon's empire, the ideas that he exported to the rest of mainland Europe did not go away. And another thing to note, which will come up in our discussion of reunification of Germany and Italy, he very importantly destroyed a state called the Holy Roman Empire. Now, for those who don't know, this is not the Roman Empire, of course. This is a very weird feudal hierarchy that persisted about in the 12th century into about the very, very beginning of the 19th century. Again, it was destroyed by Napoleon. It was a collection of German princely states that all kind of got together, and it was very haphazard. Everybody had, like, one guy had his right to own this little castle versus this guy, and it created just like a very hectic mesh of borders within the Holy Roman Empire. There was no really centralized government. They all just kind of like got together and they were voted amongst themselves, like, I want to be the emperor this time.
This kind of seems like it kind of reminds me of Curtis Yarvin a little bit, who's like influences JD Vance a bit.
Oh, really?
Yeah. who kind of is like, he kind of wants this weird version of feudalism.
They all do.
Where
they miss it.
Yeah, I think he just wants to be a king, you know?
Oh, yeah, it's always that.
Yeah. It's just, if you're at home or driving in your car, look up Curtis Yarvin.
Don't do that if you're doing the latter. Don't do that.
Yeah. Behind the Bastards does a good Curtis Yarvin episode if you just want like a good rundown of him. But he seems to be a very big influence among like the Peter Thiels and the JD Vances.
Yes.
Weird version of feudalism. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, so getting back to what I was talking about, though, the destruction of the Holy Roman Empire. This is important because now you have just a ton of German states all kind of floating around. And in addition to that, you have increased presence of Austria within Italy because France took a good chunk of Italy when it was doing its invasions. Then when they pull out, they give a good bit of that to Austria, and those would be grudges that Italians would hold for quite a while until about World War I, which we'll talk about. But so at this stage, you have a completely shattered Germany, a mostly shattered Italy, and kind of a power vacuum within Europe. There is a Congress, the Congress of Vienna, this peace plan that was introduced after the fall of the Napoleonic Empire, to try and make sure that everybody kind of stays in their lane and stays all happy and whatnot. And believe it or not, nobody really stayed happy after that. Yeah, no, who would have thought? So increasingly, though, you have these people realize, wait a minute, we are like in a particular location. You have a lot of people realizing, wait, we do all speak the same language. We do all have very similar history. You know, we do all have these similarities. And in places like Germany and in places like Italy, where they have all of those similarities, but no unified state, so it's a lot harder to, organize anything and have any national project or anything like that. This becomes very frustrating, especially as capitalism is developing. Factory owners are expanding production, and more former artisans within the feudal society are taking up arms as the working class, the proletariat.
And like you said with the factories, fascism seems to really be a post-industrialized movement. Would you agree with that?
I would say I don't think so, personally. No. I don't think it's a post-industrialized, because I don't think communism is a post-industrialized, it doesn't, I do definitely see where you're coming from, and it probably would be a lot easier for a fascist movement to take place if it were industrialized, but
because of a forever war that they're always fighting.
Right. But I could envision something like that taking place in a country that has yet to really industrialize. It would be hard to imagine in this day and age, because most of the places that are like that are former colonial subjects. And of course, whatever populist mass movement that develops there would be vastly different than a European nationalist movement, and whatever hopes and aims they have. So
I guess you
depends.
you might agree a bit with Umberto Eco's idea of fascism, which kind of has always existed as a, kind of a reactionary thing that pops up,
which we will talk about in a little bit. Believe it or not, things are not all that much better after the Congress of Vienna. Wouldn't you know it? The Enlightenment ideals, getting the taste of liberalism, of republicanism, it tastes a lot sweeter than monarchism throughout a lot of Europe. It's a way better. I mean, we look back on that now as socialists being like, oh, what a bunch of chumps. But you got to
Right.
imagine back then how they were thinking.
yeah.
It was miserable. You were bound to the land. You
were a serf.
You were a serf. You were a serf. You had to work the land in order to pay for your protection. And increasingly, as the times are moving, as industry is developing throughout mainland Europe, this is no longer a way to get by. Increasingly, people are experiencing some really hard times. And in these places where there is no really centralized state, there's no social welfare system, there's no net of any kind to catch them when they fuck up, then you're going to have a lot of issues. And that's exactly what happens. So these all come to a head in this very unique chain of events called the Revolutions of 1848. Now, these are spontaneous revolutions. I would probably put an analog to maybe like the Arab Spring that happened a little bit more than 10 years ago now. Just like this simultaneous wave of people realizing, wait, I'm entitled to way more than I'm actually getting. What the fuck? And then they all take up arms, they storm the Congress, and then nothing really happens as a result of that. So you first have these start, let's see, I have it written here. So these start in Sicily in January of 1848. And then a month later, I know a little bit more about the French one. In France, you specifically have, it was kind of funny, these folks who wanted to celebrate George Washington's birthday.
In France.
They wanted to do a dinner, birthday dinner, I should say, celebrating George Washington. And at this time, there's a king in France. They brought back the monarchy, but this time it's the Bonapartes. I believe at this time, can you actually look up who was? Because it's not Napoleon III. at this point?
Uh,
Louis Philippe. So yeah, and Louis Philippe sees this and he's like, no, I actually don't want you guys to be doing all of that, because George Washington represents liberalism and republicanism and not monarchism, which I don't like. So I'm going to make that illegal. And then they're all like, what? And then they all take up arms and then they revolt. And it doesn't really matter how it started, but it all kind of like in all of these places, it doesn't really matter how it started, like what the catalyst was. But these revolutions take place everywhere. They happen in Germany. They happen in Hungary. The Hungarian Revolution of 1848, you actually have intervention by the Tsarist Russian government because they realize that Hungary is kind of at the periphery of Austria. So they realize like these states that are on our peripheries, they might start rising up if we don't do anything about it. So they try and put a stop to it. And of course, these revolutions, they spread the idea of nationalism, of unifying, of republicanism. They spread these ideas, but nothing really happens. Like Marx has a lot. He's alive at this time during the revolutions of 1848. And it's kind of funny throughout the whole thing. He's kind of just pointing and laughing, saying, "I told you so." Where he's just like, they're not going to give you concessions because they're conservatives. They're going to react because they're reactionary. They don't want to give you a good lot in life. They want to keep the system that has existed over the course of hundreds of years in place in some way. And of course, that includes a lot of suffering. But that doesn't stop all of the fervor. So, and you have the unification of Italy and Germany. These are long processes that they mostly come to a head in about like the 1860s, 1870s.
And that's the Second Reich?
That is
in Germany?
That is the Second Reich. So when referring to Reichs, the First Reich refers to the Holy Roman Empire, which Napoleon destroyed. The Second Reich would, of course, refer to the German Empire that was established in, I don't have the year, but I think it was around 1870s, early 1870s, under the leadership of Kaiser Wilhelm I and Chancellor Otto von Bismarck.
If that name rings a bell.
They both should.
They both should.
They're both very, very.
Should.
In fact, I think there's a city in North Dakota or something named after Bismarck. They're so well known.
And the Third Reich was.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. But yeah, and in Germany, they're specifically over these issues of Austria kind of poising themselves up as like kind of the big dog. They're like the South Germans, though. There was this argument of like how should a unified German state look? Will it be dominated by Austria? Will it be dominated by Germany, like Germans in the north? So you have a couple attempts at forming some kind of centralized state. They're like, political alliances, trade agreements. These start with the North German Confederation Treaty. This is a military alliance, and eventually we get over to the North German Constitution, which were headed by those two figures that I had mentioned prior. And at that point, you have the introduction of a unified German state and all the things that they begin to do. And in Italy as well, you have a lot of efforts, specifically from a kingdom. I feel like it's the kingdom of Piedmont and Sardinia, which is where the tricolor, green, white, and red, comes from, is their flag. And you have quite a few figures popping up there to try and unify it either under either a kingdom or a republic. There's a lot of confusion and chaos in Italy specifically. In a lot of these places, that's why you see a lot of people immigrating out of Italy and Germany into the United States. This is when you have this giant boom in a German and Italian population. And in fact, before Italy united under like a kingdom under Victor Emmanuel II in 1871, You have this period of like I think 5 or 10 years in southern Italy. That's just I forget exactly what it's called, but something along the lines of like the period of banditry, where there's just bandits roaming around, just like fucking shit up because there's just no unified. There's
So
no
it's like the Wild West.
yeah,
of-
yeah. That's
of
actually
Italy.
that's a really good analogy. Yeah, the Wild West happening in southern Italy, which is what caused a lot of southern Italians to flee, which is why you have a lot of southern Italians moving into the United States.
Less assless chaps. Is that
Definitely,
is that true?
definitely much less assless. Well, they got their own fashion over there. They probably had their own kind of
I don't care what it is, but it has to be assless.
yeah. No,
it has to be assless.
I agree. Double cheeked up, bro. Like, bro.
Caked up as all hell.
So, that's kind of like and then of course this continues to swell this nationalistic fervor, as well as the setting up of alliances and treaties that will eventually come to a head in World War I. Now, I do want to send it over to Tom though, because I feel like you probably have a good bit that you want to talk about in regards to race science, which is another very important topic when discussing nationalism in Europe.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I mean at this time there was a lot of race science going around. I mean, of course in America and Europe. Largely I mean there was a lot of stuff coming out of like the eugenics.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Where would you say racism? First off, let's just start from the top. What is racism, and where did a science dedicated to defining these races, where did that originate? If you can shed a little bit of light onto that.
So I would say that race is a social construct based on the scientific racism of the 17th century, really almost as a justification for the colonization and slavery that America, not America at the time, but Europeans were enacting in North America and South America. That correlates skin tone with overall like biology, class, and actions of a person. This is where the idea of whiteness and blackness comes from, because the idea of whiteness and blackness didn't exist. I think
there was definitely acknowledgement of difference in skin tone, but those being inherent to certain characteristics and traits.
Right.
It was a very new phenomenon.
And I believe, I don't remember the play, but there is a play that talks about white skin and talks about whiteness. And that seems to be kind of one of the first instances of that.
I don't think I know which one. I know some later poems like White Man's Burden. And whatnot, but those are a little bit later.
So yeah, there's a play by this guy Thomas Middleton called "The Triumphs of Truth," where he says, "I see amazement set upon the faces of these white people," and that was in 1613. So that seems to be one of the earlier instances of the ideas of whiteness, where it comes from. But yeah, so racism, its lack of scientific worth does not negate its importance in our society, obviously, living in America, since, its practice has really been around since kind of class society arose. And it's been generally used as a way of justifying colonial domination, slavery, imperialism, incarceration, especially after the Emancipation Proclamation, murder, rape, experimentation, over-policing.
The whole 9 yards.
The whole 9 yards. I mean, it's used to basically vilify and demonize people by just looking at them and going, you have darker skin. you're bad.
Yeah,
It's just it's a stupid, quick, simple way to justify some bullshit.
yes, and of course, it is a very quick way to immediately recognize difference in one person over another. So it makes a very quick assumption. And it is worth noting that, of course, now in our current day, there is absolutely no scientific basis for any of this. But back then,
None.
there was a whole field of study surrounding this topic,
Which
of
is why,
race.
hey, liberals,
Hey, liberals.
I see a lot of liberals. I see a lot of signs saying, I believe in science. Please be critical of all science that is claimed to be science. I mean, this is a good example of things that claim to be science that were extremely detrimental. You cannot just with a broad stroke say, I believe in all science, because there are people who are trying to use it for nefarious means.
Yes, and I did want to say a couple of things to note in the development of race as a scientific field of study that was taking place at this time. There's a couple of terms that I want to go over just so we're aware. So there was this idea that developed in particular that the two different races, the white race and the black race, for example, were like, what is it, subspecies? Like there's the human species,
Right.
But then it's like this argument that there are subspecies. This is called human.
It's almost like different types of turtles, or a lot of times with fascists, you'll see them going, well, it's like dog breeds.
Right.
Which, if you know anything about dog breeds, involves a lot of inbreeding.
Yeah.
And fascists don't seem to get that nuance.
But this phenomenon is specifically called human polygenism. And this is the idea that there are different substrata of the human race. Like you said with the dog example, I wrote down here the example of like differentiating between a gibbon and an orangutan.
Right.
Like
exactly.
they look very different. They're kind of similar in some ways. And so that was kind of
they maybe have a cousin that goes way back, or an ancestor.
And specifically, as Charles Darwin is developing his theory of evolution, this is a very new and interesting topic that, of course, gels pretty nicely with Enlightenment era ideals. This seeming rejection of God, if you will, that we're all here through a scientific, I guess not war against each other, but like it's just kind of like the jungle.
Yeah.
We're all here because we all scrapped and fought each other in the jungle. We all got here through the process of natural selection.
Right.
And so following this social Darwinist theory, white people are on the top of this food chain because they just have more traits that would, of course, liken them to being at the top, which again, there's no basis for this at all. This is bullshit.
A lot of what Darwin talks about is not just the competition, within evolution, but also the collaboration and cooperation that needs to take place for a species to thrive. And that is another thing fascists tend to ignore, is the cooperation part, and just go, well, we're all fighting against each other to be top dog.
Right.
Rather than understanding that Darwinism also includes cooperation.
Help a brother out, man.
And I do want to throw this in there about just wacky racist theories. There was a theorist who was trying to say that black people were born white, but it was a big freckle. A freckle that spread across their body.
Do you happen to know who this enlightened individual?
Let me look this up, because this is, I remember reading this and just being like,
it's quite a fantastical theory, I have to say. A big freckle.
His name is Samuel Stanhope Smith. He wrote Essay on the Causes of Variety of Complexion and Figure in the Human Species, 1787. Smith claimed that the darker pigmentation was nothing more than a huge freckle that covered the whole body as a result of an oversupply of bile caused by tropical climates, which makes really no sense at all. And actually, in doing a little more research here, I came across this other theory by Benjamin Rush, which is one of the founding fathers of the U.S., and he claimed that being black was a hereditary skin disease, and believed that non-whites were actually white underneath, but they were stricken with a non-contagious form of leprosy, which darkened their skin color. Again, really makes no sense at all. And he just basically kind of used it as an argument to say, don't intermarry with them because you'll infect, your kids with it. It's a bunch of bullshit. But yeah, it's just, there's a lot of wacky theories that come out of this period, just trying to explain the biological differences between white and black people that have a cloak of scientific reasoning.
Because at this time, we're kind of just freewheeling it,
Right.
Doctors at this time are not washing their hands,
They
for
are
example. In fact, the guy who tried to get them to do that was laughed out a lot of the time. They thought he was a joke.
In a lot of scientific research and medical research really took advantage of slaves in America. If you really need an extensive look at this, read Medical Apartheid, I think by Harriet Washington. Amazing book. It's absolutely a must read. I couldn't recommend it enough. But
so just so we stay on track here, I did want to say really quick a couple of the methods that we have used to differentiate or in fact try and draw some kind of analysis of the differences. So one example, and a big one, of course, being phrenology, the science of skull measurement.
Right. If you've ever seen that Key and Peele sketch where the Nazi guy comes in and he's looking for black people, he does not say black people, but I'm not going to repeat the word. But yeah, he pulls out a what's it called?
The calipers.
The calipers, and measures their skulls. And there's no black people here. I can't do a German accent. I won't try.
That was
horrible.
That was rough. For the second that you.
But if you've seen that skit, yeah, that's phrenology.
Yes.
You'll often see a lot of very racist. If you look up phrenology, there's a lot of very racist diagrams of a white person's skull and a black person's skull, which they make look more like a monkey's.
Right. And I will say this at this time is like phrenology, of course, is bad, is terrible. There's no basis to it. But I will say the phrenology of the late 19th century, we're talking 1880s, 1890s, was fucking insane. The amount of stratification, they were really, really playing with each other as far as often what would happen is you would have a European scientist. This is at the time where if you're from a certain part of Europe, you're seen as a lesser person. So and they would use phrenology as a basis for this reasoning. So let's say, for example, you're an Englishman and you just hate those dirty fucking Irish. So you would take the calipers and you would measure, and then you would find, oh yeah, this knucklehead Irishman has got a smaller noggin than me. So that means he's stupid.
Or there's a bump in the back of his head. It's a lot of bumps on the head that explain certain
temperaments
and
or traits, and it's really all hogwash. It's bullshit. And
like, I'm sure they had a lot to say about the Greeks.
yes, Greeks. And it was funny, anytime you look up a study, anytime, like, usually how it goes is like they'll rank them. It's like leaderboards.
Oh yeah.
Like racism leaderboards. At the bottom, of course, you have black folk, and then above them you have like usually it's always so broad and vague. You have brown people, which could include from as far as like
it's always vague.
People,
and depending on who is trying to define these races that to them definitely exist, you look at all the different segmentations and how they split them up.
They don't even have a standardized
They
method.
don't.
It's all, they're all eyeballing it. And so what you find is that weirdly, whoever's conducting the study of phrenology, weirdly their race is the one ranked at the top. And so you'd have studies come out of like a French scientist doing this, and oh yeah, no, French at the top, but then an English scientist would do the same thing, and most of the rankings would follow suit. Until you got like up to like the top 10 in the leaderboard of the white races throughout Europe, and then suddenly weirdly the English would be above that of the French.
Really
Just
odd.
Very weird how it would always just kind of depend on who the fucking person conducting the test was. So kind of gives you a hint as to maybe there's no actual logical basis for any of it.
No, and I think in the future we will probably cover the book by Madison Grant called The Passing of the Great Race, which is a very, very famous eugenics book, and kind of starts that snowball of the Nordic theory that you'll often see today among like American fascists with Nordicism and all of that. So hopefully we'll get to that. I haven't read that yet. I do have it, and I will probably read it and take my notes and everything. But
hell yeah, and I will be here cheering all along the way. So just to kind of wrap this section up, though, of course, we have to talk about colonialism and imperialism, and as these two relate, nationalism in Europe and race science that is taking place within Europe. Now, of course, as we mentioned earlier, Enlightenment ideals, usually these include things like the rights of man, liberty, equality, self-determination. Weirdly, though, that usually only counts for if you're white, because if you're not, those things don't seem to fucking matter according to the empires at play,
right?
And the colonies that are set up, and you see this a lot, like Haiti, for example.
Yeah, tell Haiti at that time or today,
right?
that
especially at that time, though.
Especially at that time when France is like, yeah, all humans are equal. We all have liberty. Oh, whoa.
Not you, though. Not you.
Whoa.
Right. We were talking about me.
Yeah. We were talking about French people.
Right. I don't know who you thought you were talking about, but
we still need sugar.
Right. I still need my rum,
Yeah, I still need rum.
So, and I don't really know how you having self-determination is going to bring me that. So,
shout out to rum and cokes, though. Right?
I thought you said Roman Coke. The way you said rum and Coke.
It's like the Mexican Cokes, but it's Roman.
Those are the ones that will carry the banner.
I think we got a
Roman Empire.
Yeah, I think we got a business idea right here.
I don't. But so yeah, weirdly those things don't count if you're a colonial subject. And of course everybody wants these things, but Europeans want things that are a little bit more valuable to them. The self-determination and the liberty of their subjects doesn't really matter so much as my sugar or my flax or my tobacco or
cardamom,
my rice or my cotton or the cardamom or any of that. There's in this increasingly this growing international market, there is a need for, and especially as these industries in Europe and in North America are growing, these factories are growing, there are more natural resources that are needed in order to kind of keep up with production. And of course, somebody's got to get all of those natural, raw materials. And of course, how can you get it at such a cheap rate if everybody is seen as a dignified human being?
And yeah, exactly. If everyone is free and all this stuff, who are you going to exploit?
Right.
Right?
I got to exploit somebody.
We got to exploit somebody.
You know?
I mean...
Not me. Them.
Them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Them. And yeah, there's a couple examples of this. I mean, of course, I think I mentioned it earlier, but probably the most glaring example is Germany. Now, Germany, again, was a fragmented, it was a backwash. It was a backwater. There was not really a whole lot that it had going for it as a decentralized state. But the second that it unified, first order of business was, let's set up the Berlin Conference. Let's get all of the European powers so we can kind of fraternize a little bit, get to know each other. And then we can slice up this pie called Africa, and I can make sure I get my little piece.
Now, at this time, King Leopold and the Belgians have already been in the Congo?
Have they? I believe so, yeah.
I think so, right?
Okay, so for simplicity, we'll say that the Berlin Conference is where this pie is getting split up.
Yeah.
As far as we can tell. And that was Germany's first order of business as a unified nation. Their first order of business in realizing, wait, I have my own rights. I have my own liberties. We have our own nation. We should all get together and kind of do something. Let's have our first order of business being subjecting and completely taking advantage of these people that have nothing to do with us so we can get a bunch of free shit. And that's exactly what they did. They had not a whole lot of holdings compared to Great Britain and France. You have something you wanted to add, Tom?
Yeah, so I felt like the Belgians were in Congo before this conference. Henry Morton Stanley was in the Congo in 1878 and kind of started getting the ball rolling for the Belgian Congo.
There are numerous genocides that were taking place in Europe's acquisition of the rest of the world, which saw a lot of misery, murder, destruction, and in this case, systemic methods of extermination. So when Germany eventually does get its colonial holdings, of course, they, as any European power is doing at this time, is going to hold on to it really tight. And, in this particular place, in Namibia, which Germany has possession of at the time in the very early 20th century, we're specifically talking about 1904, there are two groups of people that live there, the Herero and the Nama people. Now, these people, of course, rose up in opposition to the German authority. They were tired of, very much for the same reasons that Europeans everywhere stood up in 1848, their own
the contradiction came to a head. The colonizer creates the colonized, and it creates a contradiction and creates a just something that needs to be resolved, and creates a hierarchy and creates something that needs to be figured out.
Right. But here's the difference. In 1848, you of course had state suppression, you had arrests, but you did not have organized genocide taking place on the people who perpetrated such an event. That is different when we're looking at colonial subjects. When we're looking at colonial subjects, generally, whoever is administering said colonial subject is going to come down on them hard with an iron fist. And increasingly, as European society is industrializing, they're coming up with industrialized methods to take about this
like the Gatling gun, right?
Like the Gatling gun, poisonous gases,
right?
of course, and bombs and explosions, etc. When looking at the Herero and Nama people within Namibia, you specifically have the Germans committing genocide against this indigenous population. They use so of course I'm pretty sure how the story goes is one of these tribes, they route into the desert. There's I believe Namibia is home to like the second largest desert on Earth. Like it's somewhere around South Africa. I forget the name of it in particular, but it's a very big desert, and basically, but yeah, it pretty much compromises of all of Namibia. Namib Desert is, of course, where the name of the country comes from. But you have these, I believe it was the Nama people, although I could be mistaken, being routed into this desert, and then through a war of attrition, left out there to starve. Anytime they would try and leave and come back to where they were living, they would be shot at or they would be attacked by the Germans. They took many other methods to precipitate this genocide. Through battle, forced starvation, forced dehydration, sexual violence,
Oddly, all things that we'll see repeated over and over again.
Medical experiments, again, which you will see Germany undertake later, and
in
of
America,
course, of America and other
Yeah.
and other states, as well as incarceration in concentration camps, the concentrating of particular populations into very tightly cramped, dense camps that are then used either through forced labor or systemic extermination of said people. And these plundered goods and resources, these are all, of course, shipped back to the factories. They're shipped over into Europe, and these are turned into money, while the people who live in these areas, of course, get not a dime, which
nothing
is, of course, the story of imperialism everywhere. Now, I want to go ahead and move on to the next topic that will be taught. This one's probably going to be a little shorter, and this is particularly the topic of socialism in Europe. Now, there are two growing camps. Okay, let's start with this. Socialism as an ideology did not start with Karl Marx. I'll just say that flat out, because I feel like a lot of people think that.
right.
He did
There's
not
more
come
of
up.
a utopian
Yeah.
version of it, where Karl Marx has his more materialist version of it.
Yes, and particularly from there expounds into communism. But socialism, the idea of goods all existing for the common social good, has existed for quite a while. And of course, the ideology would be exported throughout. But increasingly, you have arguments between socialism, which is state ownership of factories, in favor of, making them more readily available, the goods that they produce more readily available to the general populace, versus syndicalism. Syndicalism is another ideology that is sprouting up. This syndicalism arises.
Explain what it is real quick.
It is essentially an idea that the end of capitalism will be brought about through one big union. This one union of juggernaut of a union. There's been a couple attempts, the biggest one, of course, being the Wobblies, the IWW.
Shout out to the Wobblies.
Shout out. There's some good people.
Good people.
Good people that are Wobblies out there. But these folks, generally, their thought process is, we're going to get everyone involved in this one big union, and then this one big union is going to put a complete and total stoppage on all industry across the board in order to bring about its demands, which is
So a mass strike, essentially.
a mass strike, a total economy stopping strike, because strikes are effective.
They are.
incredibly effective to bring about your means, and they have been used historically to bring about better conditions for the working class. The thing is that they get along the socialists and the syndicalists, they get along because their common enemy is capitalism, is the capitalist. It's the methods that they arrive at that is a little different. And you have a few big players in syndicalism, particularly in Europe, that we'll be talking about in a minute. But you have this argument of should it be the state that's doing these things, or should it be a union? And then these same arguments will come up when the Russian Revolution happens, and you particularly have somebody like Trotsky saying that the unions should be the ones in control of the factories versus the Leninist approach of the state, which is led by a vanguard party administering these
a vanguard
entities.
party being a highly educated group of activists who will lead the masses of workers to revolution and taking over the means of production.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, these are some very entertaining ideas. And as you have authors kind of, bringing their ideas out there, Karl Marx, of course, being the most famous, as well as Frederick Engels. Everybody forgets about my man Engels. Can't forget about him. You have a couple of attempts. Probably the most famous and probably the saddest, in my opinion, the Paris Commune.
Oh, yeah.
This happens. So the Paris Commune happens during, I should say, the Franco-Prussian War. This is a war that happens, if memory serves correctly, because France is getting a little concerned at the idea of a unified Germany and the power that they'll wield. They fight, and France gets absolutely mollywopped by them. They just get totally... They just get destroyed. They get really, really destroyed to the point where at the end of it, as part of the peace treaty, France actually cedes some land to Germany called Alsace-Lorraine, which of course becomes the reason for war, one of the reasons for war, at least in the propagandist machine that Germany would, there's a whole thing. Anyway,
Paris Commune.
The point is, Germany is completely destroying France. And in all of this chaos in Paris in 1871, you have a collection of socialists all gathering...
And anarchists.
And syndicalists?
Kind
of everybody.
From what I understand, it was a lot of anarchists who had different communes that kind of rose up and tackled the French
They were
government.
all buddies.
They were
all comrades. They were all like, whether they agreed on this little thing or that little thing, they did agree on one thing, which was capitalism has to go.
Right.
But
I think the failures of the Paris Commune could largely be attributed to anarchism.
And I would say the biggest failure, and there's been a lot written about this, this is the point that Marx brings across, which I fully agree with. There's a point during the revolution where the French national banks are located in Paris, and people who are organizing this commune are like, we need to take this money. Like, it's ours now.
Yeah.
Like, we can't just... And the leadership within the commune is like, no, we can't seize this. Just kind of let it be.
Right.
We'll get into more hot water if we take this. And Karl Marx, hearing about this, is just kicking the air and kicking rocks in frustration because he's like screaming, seize the banks.
Yeah, right.
Seize the banks. And
although I as I understand, Marx did have a lot of criticisms like, don't do this the way you're going to do it. But then once it kicked off, he was very much for it. Like, all right, let's do this, motherfucker.
Oh, of course.
Because, at the end of the day, revolution's revolution. But,
yeah, we're all buddies. We're all like...
But you got to hold the revolution at the end of it.
Right.
You can't just...
You can't be kind of wishy-washy. And they were a little wishy-washy. And revolution ain't a dinner party. You kind of have to take it and...
Sorry, anarchists. I don't mean to call you out.
No,
like
you guys
that,
are good.
You guys are good.
Some of you.
But
most of you.
You got to keep power when you have it, because
I hate to
reactionaries, capitalists, fascists, are going to just come back and take it.
Right. And I hate to break it to you, but you do kind of need a state to keep things in order and keep people off your back. But
Yeah.
that's they
And
very
eventually maybe it'll dissolve. But that's maybe.
a long time in the future. But
Yeah, a long time.
but one way or the other, this fails, unfortunately. And it leaves a lot of socialists being like, okay, well, what did and did not work? And how can we do that differently in the future? But one thing that this does illustrate is the working class prior to World War I is in a flux. They're in a tizzy. They are frustrated. They're upset. The failed revolutions of 1848 didn't really get them anything. At most, it got them like a little bit of parliamentary representation, and at worst, it got them nothing at all.
Right.
Generally, like in France, for example, you had the seizure of the state by Napoleon III, kind of throwing out one monarch for this other one that everybody sees as like a joke. Like he doesn't really know. Well, he doesn't really know what he's doing, but he's like impotent compared to his uncle, Napoleon Bonaparte. But this increasing agitation that comes to a head in the Paris Commune, it illustrates that the working class is getting tired. They need change. They need more equalizing distribution of resources, of wealth. And in a lot of places, they need some kind of state structure that isn't just hundreds of years of feudal contracts all kind of blended together into this one giant tomb of paperwork, which is kind of the framework throughout a lot of Europe at the time. And then, of course, global imperialism. The planet at this point is kind of under the yoke of European empires. They have a stranglehold on all industries, on all natural resources, on every on everything.
And if you hear us talk about like the global South, largely we're talking about, colonized nations in South America and in Africa, representing the global South.
And South Asia.
In South Asia, that's true. Sorry.
And Southeast Asia. And others.
Facts.
That's facts.
That's facts.
But yeah, and I did want to say, increasingly we have this concept that capitalism, if you let it grow, it can only grow in this fashion. Because the whole basis of capitalism, demand and I'm tripping.
Supply.
Right now. Supply and demand. There it is. Supply and demand. The supply's got to come from somewhere.
It does.
Right? And this system, it's not a command economy. It's very open. It's made that way. It's laissez-faire. It's very open, and it allows for exponential growth.
It's an infinite growth in a finite world.
Right. And so, of course, as you start hitting the edges of this finite world, as you start hitting the edges of this finite nation, for example, your own industry, you have to expand out from there, develop your own colonial holdings, which comes at the great suffering of the people living there. But that doesn't matter because the people living in my country, they got all their sweet little
That's
treats.
fine.
They got their sweet treats. They got their gold. I got my diamonds. I got my sugar.
Cinnamon.
My rum. And so the means justify the ends to these European powers and their bourgeoisie. But increasingly, you have people become very critical of this, the way that we've organized things. And of course, perhaps I think the most poignant critic being Vladimir Lenin, who in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, kind of sets this out as the name would entail. It's a great read, by the way, and shockingly still holds up. You'd be surprised.
It really does.
You'd be surprised how often you read that. You'd be like, God, that reminds me a lot of something that's going on right now. You know?
Yeah.
It's weird how that keeps happening. But
odd.
Yeah. And so This combination of ideas and ideologies, imperialism, race, nationalism, European nationalism, these are all of the things that are kind of swelling in people's minds, in the propaganda sphere throughout a lot of these countries as we approach World War I. World War I is where a lot of this comes to a head and the world changes to a great extent.
And I think it's important to throw in, just with the persecution of Jews, there are a lot of pogroms happening in this period. What do you know about pogroms? I mean, just a quick definition.
I believe it's pronounced pogrom, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean,
I believe
I've heard it multiple ways.
I think it's a Russian word.
I've heard
either
some
way.
rough pronunciations of it, but
so pogroms are at this time kind of the latest iteration of anti-Semitism that happens within Europe. So for a long time throughout European history, Jewish people have always had kind of like a weird spot because they're not Christian, and the people in these areas know that. And so in the Middle Ages,
Jesus was Jewish,
right? It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. But I'm specifically talking about in the Middle Ages and prior to the Renaissance, you have a lot of extremely explicit anti-Semitic legislature. I was actually just reading there were multiple edicts throughout certain kingdoms, in particular in England, I know for a fact, but also perhaps France and at the very least the Byzantine Empire, edicts that fully ban Jews from being able to.
What time is this?
We're talking long time ago. This is about the 13th century.
Oh, okay.
It's like 1200s. This is a long time ago. But straight up edicts that just fully ban Jews from moving into a specific country. Because generally, these people, from the society at large, the Christians of a given area, they didn't usually want to live around these people that are different from them. And a lot of the time they were just coming into town as traders. So they would have their own little neighborhood set up for them. And then anytime something bad was happening to the rest of the town, they would always inevitably blame the Jews living in that town or that neighborhood on the ills. Again, with no backing and fact and reason and science at all. Like, you had crazy shit. You had like people blaming like the bubonic plague, for example,
yeah, I've heard that.
on the world Jewry.
Is this around the time where Christians didn't want to be bankers? Or
Yes, this is at the time where usury, for example, is still illegal. Usury, for those who don't know, is the collection of interest on a loan. This, in fact, would be taken away from a papal bull that was put in place, I believe, at the behest of the Republic of Venice, which was like a merchant republic in Venice, Italy. But for a long time, usury was not allowed, but usury was made legal under Christians, and I believe the story goes that it was still, usury wasn't really a thing amongst Jewish merchants. And so a lot of the time what would happen is people would take out loans from the Jewish merchants, and it kind of created this stereotype over time that the Jews got money.
Right.
And it's a very old stereotype. I personally think it has no basis in reality.
Has not,
outside of pure happenstance, outside of being in a specific time and place.
Well, Christians also, I think, just didn't, they didn't think being a banker was like a good thing.
Yeah.
Like they barred themselves
they didn't think
from
most
being
things were being were a good thing.
Right, but they kind of barred themselves from it, and then Jewish people kind of filled those roles.
Yes.
And then it's ever since been used to criticize them and obviously persecute them. And as we'll see in World War II, exterminate them. And I think this is actually a pretty good segue into our next section, just talking about kind of the ideological roots, because I think we've done a pretty decent job at just covering what happens leading up to World War I at this point, with, swelling nationalism and the reunification of Italy and Germany. We've talked a bit about the race science and antisemitism that will eventually become hallmarks of fascism. And we've talked a bit about socialism as a concept and communism as an ideology. And yeah.
The next episode, we're going to be talking about philosophers and cultural, artistic type movements and people that were happening in the Italian peninsula, and Germany and just Europe at the time leading up to World War I. And then we're also going to be talking about World War I and how much fun that one was, how it was a grand old time for everyone involved, and how it really was the war to end all wars, because
happily ever after.
There wasn't another war, and it didn't motivate anyone to change their structure of government to be fascist. It just did,
definitely not.
Yeah, it's a weird, I don't know, it kind of came out of a weird vacuum that, historians are still kind of scratching their head, like what kind of happened there,
Yeah,
Suckers.
Until next time, everybody, this is Tom.
This is Tom, and bye.